All right, a bit about myself. Yeah, that guy that you're seeing is me, so don't freak out. I mean, no need to leave the session. And he has already introduced it, so I won't spend a lot of time. And thanks to Gits for providing this opportunity to talk. All right, don't you think that a recipe for a successful talk looks something like this these days? Yeah, you pour in a bit of microservice, you pour in a bit of micro front ends, and yeah, dare I say, you unleash the power of LLM, and bam, you have a successful talk, right? And I'll try to tick most of those boxes. So I hope you're geared up for this journey. All right, and I'm sure you must have heard the rumors. The end of the developers is near, thanks to Devin AI. Or not really, right? Give it a few more years. But I'm sure in Incubite, we are highly optimistic about the opportunities with AI, and we are investing in it, and you'll hear about it at the end. But we are sure that AI is not going to replace us. AI is just going to make us faster, efficient, and a lot more better at what we are doing. So we just need to roll with the hype and adopt it. Yeah? All right, so you already know the title of the talk. I think it's a bit injustice to what I'll be talking about, but it should be mastering legacy code-based modernization. And one of the case studies we'll be looking at is from a real experience where a large-scale enterprise went from VB, I'm not sure a lot of you would even know it, VB is Visual Basic to Angular and beyond. So we'll look at their modernization journey. Yeah, and the track is front-end, but again, I think it's equally applicable to back-end. I'll talk about a lot of general things that apply to all the front-end as well as the back-end. So if you have a few people who might be interested, ask them to join in. All right, so as I said, it's based on a real experience with an EMR company. Now what's EMR? EMR is electronic medical records. It's imagine your patient history, like your medical history digitized. Yeah, so everything about your vaccinations, your the medicines that you're taking, the labs that you might have, lab reports, everything is digitized at single place. And no points for guessing. It's a very compliance heavy and a complex domain and a high risk domain. So you're playing with the life of a person when you introduce a bug in that system. Yeah, along with that, this company happens to be one of the top companies providing EMR solutions. And the scale of it is there are 800,000 professionals who are actively using their product. A lot of them happen to be in US, and the compliance and the legal scene in US is much more stricter than us. Yeah, there are army of 300 developers distributed in different geographies, just hammering on that product, working every day. And finally, this is the scale of the problem that was dealt with when the modernization began. It was 1.4 million lines of code just in the front end, not even talking about the back end. Yeah, so that's the scale of the problem we are talking about here. All right, so if that has piqued your interest enough, this is the screenshot of what the application looked like after the migration happened. And you can see there's no Windows feel over here, which is a proof that it is actually a web application. All right, so application modernization, as I said, maybe the title of the talk could have been better, but how I see it is application modernization is a larger umbrella, and within which you have a section called legacy code-based modernization, where you're just looking at the code base. But application modernization has no fixed definition that's widely accepted in the industry. Some people look at it like CI/CD, modernizing their tech stack, and everybody has a separate viewpoint about this. So this is one of the ways we can look at application modernization, which is bringing legacy applications up to speed to meet the current and the future requirements. And it is also about modernizing your tech stack, adopting modern technologies, capabilities, and architectures. Now I know this word legacy evokes negative feelings, right? Whenever I say legacy, you'll be like, oh yeah, I know, I've been there. But that doesn't have to be like it. I'm defending legacy word here, but imagine the cleanest of code or the best of code you write today, as soon as you commit it in Git history, it becomes part of the legacy, right? And there are legacy systems out there which are still serving us. So they are here to stay. They are not going to go anywhere. This is another way of looking at modernization. And I like this definition a lot better because that's what the theme of this talk is going to be about. So it's about a continuous process, and I need to stress the word continuous. It's not going to end. It's a continuous process of improving the strategic systems to increase the business agility. Yeah, each of that word has weight, and we'll talk about all the things soon. All right, so now that we've understood a bit about what modernization is, now let's also understand why should you or anyone consider doing modernization. There are plethora of reasons out there, and this by no way is like an exhaustive slide of all the reasons, but these happen to be some of the major reasons why people consider modernizing. So some of them are pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go into details of each of them, but the most important ones are threat of competition and slower innovation. Yeah, if you have a legacy system, you understand how difficult it is to add new features or maybe use latest technologies and tools. AI, right? So all that becomes difficult if you're using a dying ecosystem. You won't have enough tools and libraries out there which will help you with all of that. And the other point I want to stress about is also the dwindling talent pool. How many of you would love to work on a COBOL or a Visual Basic 6 if there was an opportunity? How many of you would consider applying? No one, right? Because you don't want to be using those technologies. And that's, again, one of the leading reasons why organizations need to keep modernizing their tech stacks. And that leads to unhappy developers. Even if you do work, you don't work there with happiness. And yeah, there are other reasons, as I said, security, being cloud native. All right, and those are good reasons to modernize, but there sure are good reasons to not modernize. And some of them are doing hype-driven development or resume-driven development. I hope you understand those terms. Hype, yeah, there's this new JS Shiny framework out there. Every 48 hours, there's a new framework, and the developers just get sucked in. Yeah, that's not a good reason to modernize. You may do a POC with it and have fun with it, but not a good reason to modernize. Resume-driven development, I think that's on us interviewers to create this culture where I interview candidates and they have microservices, micro frontends on their resume, and when you ask them, hey, why did you use it? They don't have an answer. Now that's not a good reason to modernize, right? You need to know why you are going ahead with microservices or any tech stack per se, or any architecture. All right, so here's where I request you to be engaged with me, and there are a few questions that I have to understand what the, how many of you have experience with this. So how many of you are currently engaged in application modernization or actively considering it? Anyone over here? Oh, nice, there are a few. Awesome, I thought there would be no one. Interestingly, 92% of the companies, it's based on a report, which was, yes, from 2022, I probably should refresh it, plan to or are currently modernizing their applications. How many of you have pitched but faced pushback on the proposal? Wow, nice, 2 people, amazing. We all understand, as tech people, we understand that it's the need of the hour, but still 97% of the people who gave that survey felt that they will get a pushback, and probably they didn't even pitch. So can you guess what could be the leading reason for that pushback, even though you have a strong case? Yeah, please. Sorry? Yeah, so if it's working, don't touch it. Good one. Anything else? Anyone else? No? All right, so cost, risk, all those are good reasons, but I personally feel if you look inside, there is one more reason hidden inside you, which no external things affect, and that is not talking in terms of business. How many of you pitched in terms of saying that, hey, this is what the business is going to get out of it. I understand what your problem is as business, and hey, let me be a support to you. And as I've said, the technical challenges these days are business challenges. So first thing that we need to do is understand where your business is heading, whichever company you're working for, or if you're outsourcing work, what your client wants. That's the primary thing to understand before you even think of pitching a modernization project. How many of you have successfully modernized your application in some or the other form? It can be a small win, but how many of you have been successful? 1? Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay, 2. Thank you. So interestingly, that maybe tells us a bit, more than 79% of the teams fail at modernization. And that's an interesting number. And my goal is to reduce this number from 79 to maybe next year GIDS 63, or maybe even lower. I don't know whether I'll be talking about the same thing again, but so let's look at some of the reasons for why the app modernization efforts fail. Now, it's from the executive's point of view, it's failure to set expectations. It can be with the team or with your customers. If the expectations are not right, the goals are not well understood, you're not sure where you're headed. So that's a recipe for disaster. The other one is too costly, and at no point for guessing, too costly is going to be there. From the technical point of view, it's the lack of intelligent tools. We don't have tools out there which can help us in modernizing. And that's where one of the tools I'll be talking about on which we are working is going to come in. So more on that later. Inadequate skills. Modernization projects, at least any medium or large scale modernization projects don't come easily, or they take a lot of skills to get right. And yeah, they are too complex. Well, while working on modernization, you will encounter different scope of work, right? And that scope in this diagram goes from largest to smallest. There might be a smaller category still out at the lowest, but I've just kept it out. The highest of them is the architectural scope. Yeah, so you having to change the architecture or enterprise architecture of your product. And yeah, you might have good reasons for it, adopting microservices or micro front ends and compliance. Those are some of the good reasons. The other category of it, which is a bit smaller, is you having to change your tech stack or framework or language due to some reasons. It might be performance. You've hit the ceiling of the performance that this tech stack can provide, and no other option but to change it. And yeah, security issues, if there are loopholes in the language that you're using, or if you are part of a dying ecosystem like VB, you would want to move out of it. So the thing I want to stress about on the last one is that last one is not really the scope of work which we want to address here. That can be done as a business as usual. So for converting the best practice from React class components to functional components doesn't need you to initiate a modernization. You can just keep doing it iteratively. Yeah. All right. So now here's where the things start getting a bit more deeper. Yeah. Let's look at some of the modernization strategies that are available out there. Big Bang. Anyone surprised? I guess no. So Big Bang is replacing the old system or technology in one fell swoop. So you go from 0 to 1. No middle path or no middle stage. And when the things are, this is useful when the things are predictable and very small scale. So you more or less know how everything is going to happen. So may as well do it in one fell swoop. But it's very risky as well for any medium-sized or large-scale enterprise project. It never happens the way you want it to. You encounter a roadblock and then you're stuck. And then modernization is gone. The other approach, I'm sure a lot of you must have already heard about it, is Strangler Fig. Now, someone who might know what Strangler Fig is, it happens to be a plant that starts wrapping itself around the home tree and then slowly and steadily strangles it, and then finally the only thing that's left is the strangler tree, and the home tree dies most of the times. And this diagram shows you that hollow area where the older tree used to be alive. And that's the exact analogy Martin Fowler used to describe the Strangler Fig approach of dealing with legacy systems and modernizing them. So it's a gradual and incremental approach. It's replace and retire. So you take a few feature set, you move it to the newer system, and then you retire the older system. And yeah, it requires you to have some sort of a proxy or an API gateway layer where you would do that redirection, right? From the older system to newer system. And if it requires maybe moving back to the older system in case of issues. So yeah, it requires a bit more engineering effort. And then that work is something that will get thrown off as soon as you're done with the migration. So it requires a bit more work. But it's the default option for any large scale or enterprise scale application. It's not going to happen with Big Bang, or at least I don't think. And And you need to be strategic with the choice of your slices, what you choose to modernize and when, or in which order. And we'll talk about that strategy right after this. All right, so let's look at Strangler Fig in action or visualize it. I'll not spend a lot of time, it's self-explanatory. So basically this is the system boundary which you want, this is a module or maybe a feature set that you want to move out of your legacy system. So you add a facade on top of it, which I said is the proxy or an API gateway. And then you create a new service. And when I say service, it can be a macro service, it can be a microservice, it can be an Azure function, a Lambda, that you can just use whatever is applicable in your context. But this diagram just makes the logical part of it clear. It's not an architecture diagram. Now, initially you move the traffic to the new system, you do the writes from the new system, but you're not reading from that system to make sure everything is still working. The newer system is doing the writes as expected. Once you have enough confidence, you just cut off from the old system and everything is being utilized from the new system. Finally, when you have enough confidence, you just do away with the older system, and that's where you see the legacy system going smaller in size. Make sense? All right. So quickly, we've already talked about this, but quickly let's compare both the approaches. The good thing, one of the good things with Big Bang is there is no prolonged transition stage. So as I said, you go from 0 to 1 and you don't have to keep both the systems alive. You just decommission the older system and you commission the new system. But it comes with its own risks. It also brings with it a big bang of issues, right? Because you are not incremental. You just put it into production and all the users are complaining about the bugs that you might have leaked. Now it's a stop the world, or at least it's supposed to be a stop the world or going dark state. Why? Because imagine if you are adding new features, continuously adding features to the old system, you have to keep the newer system up to date with it, right? So you're constantly adding, and the new system also has to add that feature, and who knows how long that prolonged stage is going to be. So ideally, if you are even wanting to do Big Bang, at least stop adding new features in the older system. Yeah, and then you end up in a catching phase for a lot of time. Well, with Strangler Fig, it reduces the risk. First of all, you should pay attention to what the diagram has. So it reduces the risk because you are getting incremental feedback from the users. So you decide the slices and you put them all the way to production. If there are any issues, you weed them out. You also get the feedback whether the UX looks good, whether performance is good, and based on that learning, you can tweak in the next iterations. So it's a continuous learning process as well with Strangler Fig. And it's also, think of it, in which approach would the morale of the team be high? The Big Bang or Strangler Fig?
Yeah.
Strangler Fig, right? Big Bang, I don't even know whether it's going to work in production. But with Strangler, I know it is working. The stakeholders are looking at the output. Even the developers are happy that, okay, I'm shipping my things to production. So that itself makes it a good choice. Yeah, there are cons. I would say challenges, not cons. It requires you to have a lot more skills. You have to be strategic with the choice. And there is a long transition stage where it's a bit more work for the DevOps or the operations to keep both the systems alive and kicking. Yeah. All right, so choosing what to modernize. Knowing or deciding what to modernize happens to be one of the leading reasons why people find it challenging. And again, all of that is coming from the report. None of that is made up. How many of you know this topic or have read any of these books? Awesome, a lot of people. Thank you so much. So I'm sure then you must be aware of the term domain distillation. Now, for those who don't, distillation in general is a process of refining something. In our case, what we want to do is want to refine the domain or the business area that you are dealing with. Yeah, and once this exercise is going to help us in the next stage where we are going to make the choice. So with the output of that distillation process is going to be division of your domain in 3 areas: core domain, supporting subdomain, and generic subdomain. Now, core domain, it's your core. it's what makes the most amount of money. It's where the business lies, right? It's where the maximum value lies. That's what your core system is. That's your USP. That's what you're selling. Supporting subdomain is something that's not as valuable or maybe not as complex as your core domain, but it still makes you money, right? And finally, generic subdomain is something that is commoditized. Imagine I'm opening a new e-commerce shop and I need authentication solution. Will I try to create it in-house? No. If I have a lot of money and engineers are sitting idle, maybe, but most of the people won't, right? And the reason is you are not in the business of building authentication systems. You are in the business of creating e-commerce. Yeah. So that's what generic subdomain is. And no points for guessing, it has the least amount of business value. So what you don't want to do is try to modernize that generic subdomain. All right. So this is the main exercise that I've personally found useful, is to create a scorecard. Now, at the right, you will see two pictures. Let's focus on the first one. So there you see the business area or the feature set divided into core, subdomain, and supporting and generic subdomain. Now, and then there is a highlight on the Goldilocks zone. Now, what is Goldilocks? Let's first try to understand that. It's an astronomy term for when they try to search for external life, like alien life. In our case, Earth happens to be in the Goldilocks zone of the sun, and that's why we have life. Any closer to it, you'll be Venus, no life. Any farther than that, Mars, no life. And that's the analogy we want to apply here. You want to stay focused on the areas which are initially not so risky or not so high business value, that in the worst case, if you screw it up, your business is not going to stop. So it still has a lot of value, but you're not taking as much risk initially. Yeah, so that's just one way to look at it. And those are just two dimensions, business value and complexity. But you can add more dimensions as well. For instance, risk, compliance, defect density, churn rate. There can be many other reasons which are relevant in your case, right? And then what we want you to do is create a matrix out of it, where you have your, it can be microservices, your features or slices, and then in the columns you will add all the dimensions and you will rate them. In this case, it's 1 to 3, it can be 1 to 5, whatever suits your needs. And then why this exercise is an excellent thing to do, it creates transparency for the business as well. Because there's no fixed dimension of just technology. It talks about business as well. So they are equally partners in this exercise with you. And when you decide something based on this, it sure is going to be at least, if not 100% successful, there's a high chance of it being successful. All right, so lastly, common pitfalls before we start talking about the case study. Yes, app modernization is an iceberg. Why? There are a lot of unknowns. And the last thing you want to do is be the captain who knows the iceberg warning, but still goes full steam and finally reaches the bottom of the ocean. I guess you understand the analogy here. So some of the pitfalls are not being strategic with the choice of what you choose to modernize. Too low effort, most probably failure, or no value added. Too high and you risk a lot. Not considering the potential trade-offs. Now, this is very important. No technology is going to solve all your problems. Technology is an enabler. So older technology might have some issues, so will the newer technology. But you have to be very clear with your trade-offs. What is the trade-off that matters to me and what I can give up on? And what I want you to do is create ADRs out of it. ADRs is Architecture Decision Records. Have you heard about that? Anyone? All right. If you're not doing that exercise, please start now. Only thing, if you take away out of this talk, if you start doing ADRs, that would be a big win for me. And then underestimating the challenge, scope creep. Yeah, I'm sure, let's imagine you are in a situation where you are changing all the components and bringing them to AngularJS. Imagine a product owner comes to you and says, hey, now that we are touching all the files, why not make the round, like the button borders rounded? why not we change this theme a bit? And then what you find after a while is that you're chasing a goal which you did not intend to chase at all. So that's what scope creep is. I'm sure all of you might be able to relate with it. Happens. And what you want to do is consciously cut off anything that doesn't align with where you're headed. And saying no is one of the important things that craftsmanship teaches us. And not fully committing. All right, so let's get started with the case study. And by now, I think all of you understand the buzzword, like the terminologies. EMR is the medical system. VB is Visual Basic 6. It was a desktop programming language which had a rapid application development environment. So it had a what you see, what you get editor, right? Low code, no code type of a situation. I just drag and drop the things and the forms just create themselves. So you don't have to worry about the CSS. Maybe that's why they began using that. And yeah, how they made it and modernized to AngularJS and further. So there's further and beyond as well. All right, so let's look at the architecture when the migration was about to begin. It was a fairly simple architecture. It was based in 1992. So yeah, Microservice was not there at that time. It was a monolith. The best thing they had done, the best decision they had taken at that time was to have an entire architecture and decouple the front end from the get-go. Now, this made the actual modernization effort a lot simpler because there is clear separation of concerns. And yeah, the front end was Visual Basic, back end was Java. Again, a very wise decision at that time because that gave them cross-platform. Not with VB. VB is a Windows, Visual Basic 6, Visual Basic.NET and the other versions are cross-platform, but not Visual Basic 6. And yeah, rest I think is understandable, but the communication was happening in XML and RPC. All right, so this was the deployment strategy. It was an on-premise deployment. On-premise, I hope you understand, everything was deployed on the customer site. So from the database to the API server, and if there were 100 client applications, machines, the software had to be installed, the client software on those 100 machines, right? And that became one of their challenges later. And it was a multi-instance. Now, as I said, it's a compliance-heavy domain. So there was no sharing of data or not even sharing of resources because it was an on-premise deployment. All right, so 2011 around is when the modernization effort began. And yeah, 2011, we are still talking about Visual Basic. Otherwise, this old man would have retired and living a peaceful life somewhere else. So what were the challenges and the drivers? Challenges, security, scaling issues were the primary reasons. VB6 was a dying ecosystem. They could not keep using that for long. Apart from that, as I said, the product had been developed for more than 20 years now, and 300 developers still working on it. Now imagine the monstrosity of that system, right? And they were hitting the limits of number of forms that VB can support. And then they were using workarounds and DLLs to make sure they can still keep moving ahead, but they'll keep hitting the limits. The other issue was VB6 was a 32-bit system. So it had memory limitations as well, and they'll keep facing those out-of-memory issues, and the customers would keep calling, hey, it's not starting. Imagine being in that situation. Cross-platform. The users had started adopting Chromebooks, MacBooks, and they were demanding clients that would work in those environments. But VB6 did not have any of that support. Cost of releases and upgrades, yeah, understand it, manually installing it in every machine. And that was also becoming a bottleneck for adding more customers, because one customer with 300 machines means 300 times overhead on their installation machine, installation team who was just dedicated to do the installations. And attracting attracting talent. So, okay, now is when the things start getting real. They decided upon a few guiding principles to make sure they don't derail from their goals. The first one was everyone's buy-in. So everyone from the top management to the founder of the company to every individual developer had to be convinced and brought on the same page that there is no other way to move ahead. We have to modernize, and that's one of the most crucial steps. if there is you versus me, if there is business versus the technical team, the second you hit a roadblock, they'll take the support away. And then that modernization effort will get paused and maybe never will come out of the grave again. So that's why it's important to have everybody's buy-in. Incremental even when it's hard. Hard because, as I said, you need to create more code. You have to keep both the systems alive. You have to maintain backward compatibility for a while. And then you can iteratively decommission it. So it takes a bit more effort. And in the time that you are doing that modernization, you may even have to reduce the performance a bit, or maybe the UX doesn't look as good as it was. But those are some of the issues, that trade-offs, again, you choose to be okay with, because for you, making the project successful is the higher priority. All right, so exploration. This is the most important step of your modernization. That's the iceberg we were talking about. If you go into a modernization effort without exploring as many unknowns as possible, you will surely hit a roadblock, and most probably you won't have a workaround available. So this happens to be the screen from the older VB. You can see Windows running and the classical Windows 98 theme. Analyze and map is the first step that they did. So they analyzed everything that they were dependent on. It could be external dependencies, external APIs, utilities, any language specific features that they might be using. All of that was discovered, explored, and then their mapping was done with AngularJS. So how is it going to translate in AngularJS? Well, when you're changing the tech stack or language, not everything is portable. So if some features were not supported, you needed to find alternatives, and they found the alternatives and documented them. The other was dealing with the complexity. Now, this complexity is going to be helpful for us later when we decide on the execution. So if there were, I don't have the number, but I'm sure it was more than a few thousands of forms out there. And every form had maybe about 20 to 30 buttons. And each of that button opened a pop-up of its own, which had features of its own. So it was, no points specific. It was freaking difficult system to deal with. Each button, opened a separate pop-up, and they were also having a bit of tech debt, where some of the logic that should have been in the API layer was leaking into the front end. All right, so what was the execution strategy? Now, this is where they were planning how to execute it and how to be strategic with the choice of their slices. So they went ahead with the strangler strategy, which aligns with their incremental even when it's hard. But we have still not decided what this slice is going to be like. So that's the next discussion we'll do. Apart from that, feature flags. Feature flags were introduced to make sure not everyone sees the change at once. And there was a strategy that they had gone with, which we'll discuss in the later slides coming soon. Documentation and training. I've already discussed the ADRs. Along with that, best practices and conventions had to be jotted down, because again, it was a new language, new tech stack, so it needs documentation and enough training so that you are not making that same mistake again and not again creating a legacy system to deal with. So it's important to nail down those best practices from the get-go. Spikes and POCs were done to ensure that whatever was being discussed is actually achievable. So there might have been multiple iterations of this, because you do a spike, okay, you come back, it's not possible, and then you think of something else. What I'm going to talk about was the final execution strategy because of the limit of time. And then the final step they did was to create an exemplary example, which would almost serve like a reference point for everyone. So everyone will follow that and make sure they're aligned with that direction. All right, so this was one of the first possible slicing strategies that they thought about. Now, in the left, everything that you see in gray is VB application, and everything that you see in green is the Angular application, AngularJS. Now, the first thing that they thought was, hey, won't it be cool if we can somehow load the AngularJS component within VB? Now, sounds like a fair idea, and that would help us in moving ahead one form at a time, and then we don't have to move everything at once. Sounds like a fair strategy, right? Do you think, or how many of you think this is the slimmest possible slice? No? What could be better?
Angular was not there. Now we call it outer component for if the component may not support that advanced feature of PA.
Yeah, that's something we'll discover during the spike. But I'm talking about the slicing strategy. Can you, good slice? Anyone else? Go back. Sir.
This feature, it's like technically we are just finding.
It depends.
There is no I'm taking this feature and then moving it out.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying that I'm taking this form and
Now, yeah, I mean, I get you, but most of the times your forms would be aligned with a domain or a feature set, right? They would not have random features from 10 different modules. So it is not exactly aligned, but a lot of it is about choosing which feature set you want to move ahead of others based on the strategy. Yeah, but what I am talking about right now is if you went ahead with this strategy, would it be the slimmest slice? As in, no? Okay, cool. So it is not, and the reason is the exploration that we did. We understood there are 20, 30 buttons in each form, and each of them opens a pop-up of its own, and who knows whether it's creating a one more pop-up, right? That's unmanageable. So yes, it was too big of a slice to deal with. We can definitely do better. So what if we did this? From your AngularJS application or the page that is loading, you can somehow show the older pop-up from the VB realm or the VB domain. Won't it be cool if we did that? Everyone following me? Awake still? All right. So let me know if any of this is at least the strategy. Execution is a separate part, but the strategy should be clear, right? That somehow, I don't know, we do a workaround, we'll add a hack, who cares? We are sticking to the incremental strategy, even though in the short term, as I said, there will be a few quirks in the way you need to make it work. Because again, they are two technology tech stacks that are not compatible with each other. Right? It's almost like a rewrite, but an incremental rewrite. So you have to give up on something. So yeah, turns out this is the slimmest possible slice, right? And for this to happen, we need to be able to show the Angular component from within the VB application. And likewise, if a button is clicked in Angular, you should be able to open the VB form. Clear? All right. Feature flags. What was the strategy around feature flags? I'm sure you must have seen feature flags by now. In Teams, in GitHub, yeah, some of us have to use Teams, so thanks to Microsoft. But yeah, you get the point, right? So feature flags allows you to be mindful of who uses your feature and who cannot use your feature. So initially the strategy was to keep the older UI or the VB look and feel as the default. That's a fair enough default value to start with. And then they will handpick the customers which are always at the bleeding edge of upgrading their system. So anytime you give an upgrade, those would be the first set of users who will upgrade their system, right? So you have that insight already, which customers are very open to upgrades. And along with that, the strategy was to also not pick a practice or a hospital that has 300 machines or like 300 users. That again would be too difficult to deal with when you're just getting started, right? So the strategy was to pick maybe smaller sized hospitals which are open to upgrades. And then for them, the admin, the feature flags in their case was controlled by admin. So the admin would enable the new UI for those set of hospitals. And then what that allows you to do is get feedback. Whether it's going good, are there any performance issues? If there is a critical bug, you can always roll it back to the older UI. After a critical mass is reached, enough users have adopted the new UI, you slowly and steadily enabling it for not all, but a large majority of users. Now you have fair enough confidence that yes, my system is working, it's stable. Let's make new UI the default option now. Yeah, so now admin will ship it and every new hospital will see new UI as default. finally, once you, in the strangler fig we discussed, once you have enough confidence that everything is going good, you ultimately decommission that part of your module and then you delete that code base. That's how you slay the monolith. Yeah? Execution. Now this stage is very short and crisp because I know not a lot of gory details about Angular and VB. Most of you won't be familiar with it, but I'll still cover the high level of how the mechanics of it were working. All right, so strangler fig facade in action. In this diagram, you see everything on the left is the classic UI and everything on the right is the new UI per se. That's the new UI working. So what you need to observe is multiple, like this thing that you're looking at is the menu we were looking at in the older screen. And wherever you see this blued out is where the strangler fig code was there. So every time you were deciding to move from a new form, like one form to other, that's what your routing logic is. Because it's a UI. There is no API layer to create a proxy for. So this is like a modified version of your strangler fig. But at the end, strangler fig, the essence of strangler fig is incremental and gradual. Cool. So the most important thing was when, like for new UI, what they did was they created just one form, not an individual form for every menu. One form, the only thing it did was show a web browser control. And then VB had that support. It was called wow control or something. Now it was almost like a iframe into your application. Yeah, a lot of times micro front ends use iframe as one of the options, but better of course is web components. That's a different talk. So yeah, it was almost like a portal in AngularJS realm. Yeah, the users are in VB, but they are seeing Angular inside it. And then because we were being incremental from Angular as well, there was strangler fig code inside it, so that if somebody clicks in Angular, a button which is not yet moved to Angular, it will show the VB form. That's how the strangler fig mechanism worked. Now this is strangler fig in action again from an on-premise, like the deployment point of view. So here you see what additional component that was added is a like web server which can serve your Angular files. Yeah, and you can see the monolith getting slayed here. A few of the modules have already been replaced and moved into the Angular website or the single page application. And yeah, there was to and fro communication happening from VB to Angular, and of course it was talking to the API server. And these are some of the final slides where I show you what this actually is an increment that they had done. So behind you see the VB form, and on top of it what you're seeing is a VB form of course, but within it the contents are from Angular, right? And again the look and feel is the UX is a bit different. So all right, there was one thing which I mentioned, which I forgot to mention, which was the principle of least astonishment, which was part of the principles, but I forgot to talk about it. What it means is that the last thing you want to do is surprise the user with a change that's drastic, right? So what it meant was, if a current workflow took 4 clicks to complete, after the modernization, it should still take 4 clicks. It shouldn't be either more or less. That's very important. Otherwise, they would be like, what changed? Something is wrong, right? So that's not what you want to do, because your focus is just to replace the UI. You don't want to introduce any. It's a refactoring. Think of it that way. No logical change. It does, and that's why they have done a pretty good job of making it look awful, right? An Angular application can look way better than this, but they've tried to keep it as like bare bones as possible to make sure it's not a huge change. But yes, there will be a bit of difference because you can't mimic the same VB theme inside your Angular application. That would mean again taking a one more initiative, and so this is just bare bones, and again trade-offs. In their case, that was a trade-off they were okay to deal with. So yeah, workflows is one, and the other thing is changing the position of the button from a checkbox to a drop down, or don't do any of that. That is not UX change. That is you making breaking changes in the UI, which would just confuse the user. This is the second phase where from the Angular component, the VB component is opening. Right? So all the things I talk about have actually happened in reality, and none of that is made up. Just in case you were feeling it's not possible. All right, so this is a journey that almost like took them 6 freaking years to complete. That's the amount of time a good sized legacy modernization project takes. In their case, it was on the higher end. Maybe there were some other reasons. And 2016-17 is when the AngularJS migration completed. But now the question is this the end? Well, not really. It's an ongoing journey. So 16-17 is when Angular migration was done. 2022, AngularJS became end of life. Same old story, right? And yeah, they probably have already Angular, they moved to Angular framework. I don't know the latest, but I'm damn sure that the journey from AngularJS to Angular would be a lot more smoother as compared to what we had to deal with in this case. Why is that? Because Angular already provides you that bridge from, you can move from the older to the newer application, and that makes it easy for you to get it done. You can be incremental about it, and this diagram just shows it, how you can be incremental. You can just pick up a tree or component tree, convert the service to a new one, convert one component at a time, and then using the bridge, you can incrementally make the changes. So this is the later stage where everything is Angular framework. But that's not what the talk is about, so I'm skipping that. If you are interested, we can talk individually. Ending notes. A complex engineering challenge, for sure. But it sure is a fun journey to be part of as well. And yeah, Incubate thrives by solving these problems every day for their customers. Right now, I am engaged in a large-scale enterprise modernization project, and I sure love that challenge. And those projects are easy to propose, but not so easy to complete. And that's where I hope this talk is going to serve as a foundation for you to make sure if the modernization, it's not a if, when the modernization black hole sucks you into it, this talk is going to serve as the foundation, hopefully, to come at the other side of it. All right, so that's where the tool I was talking about, or the solution accelerator I was talking about, comes in. It's an AI-powered solution that our teams are using that makes these modernization efforts 10x faster. I imagine having this when they were doing that migration. Hope, like, I don't know, maybe those 6 years would have shrunk to 2 years. And having these tools really helps you, and that's what we at Incubate feel. AI is going to help us a lot in these areas. They'll make it easier to explore things. They'll make it easier to explore the unknown unknowns. Known unknowns are okay, unknown unknowns are not. So maybe, and then it has a lot of capabilities. If you're interested, you can check out the website. Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks to G Ideas for hosting me.